Well, thanks for being here this morning. I got to fill in the time until they get here. Um, well, I was thinking back this week about, I don't know, maybe it's something we all do in our early 20s. Like we move around a lot because like, when we get older, like in our 30s, we realize like how expensive and pain in the butt moving is. But yeah, you know that, right? Yeah, they know that right now. They've been moving. Um, So when Karina, she's not here today. She's actually in Portland with a friend. But when Karina and I were first married, we moved around a lot, and we actually moved. We were first married and lived in Springfield, Missouri, and then we moved to Maryland, where I worked for a church, and we moved back here to Colorado, and then we moved back to Springfield. A lot of moving, and that's where I had attended. We'd both attended college there, and we were good Baptists back in that day. So when you get married and the husband gets a job, the wife just drops out of college because, don't judge me, we were Baptists then, so please don't judge me. But that's what you did back in the day. And so we decided, well, let's get back to Springfield because I can get back in those job network circles and Karina can finish college. But as the old saying goes, you can't go home again. We found that to be true. And one of the things that stands out to me about that is when we went back to Springfield, Missouri, we were attending a Bible college and a Baptist. Its actually name still is Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri. And they were big on church attendance, which, as you can imagine, why? And they wanted you to attend a local church, obviously. The thing is, though, they were very strict on what church you could actually attend. Basically, they had a list of approved churches, which basically came down to any church which financially supported them, which I guess makes sense, right? Now, I found this, though, unsatisfactory for several reasons. One being is, again, don't judge me. This is just pre-Baptist. This is Baptist me, so please don't judge me here. According to Baptist teaching, I, as the man, was the spiritual leader of the household, and I should have authority about where my family attends church. The thing is, though, the school was basically requiring that my wife had to attend one of their approved churches, and I found that to be unsatisfactory, I guess you might say. So we had a meeting with the dean of something or somebody, and I remember I told him my opinion, and he kind of looked at us and said, well, Karina can attend another college if you feel that strongly about it. So there was not a whole lot of room for negotiation in that arrangement. And we'll talk about that other church some other time. But about that same time, I enrolled at the state school, Missouri State University, to do a graduate program in religious studies. And despite my BS in Youth and Bible, that was my undergrad degree, BS in Youth and Bible, yeah. Despite that rigorous academic training at Baptist Bible College, they made me do a couple prerequisites to get into their master's program. So one of them was, I don't remember, but the other one I most remember was called Modern Religious Thought. And it was basically a survey of 20th century Christian theologians. And, I was somewhat obviously kind of going through this disillusionment period with my Baptist world and Baptist circles as I knew it. And at the same time, I'm being exposed to all these new ideas and new ways of thinking about God and Christianity. And I was certainly coming to a point in my life where I was confused, I was lost, I really had no idea what I was doing. And I was kind of just ready to some extent, just leave it all and give it all up entirely. And several weeks into the class, I reached out to the professor and said, hey, is there someone I could talk to about this on a more personal level? And she referred me to a local pastor named Phil Snyder, who was actually a former Baptist himself. And so I think I called him up or something, and we scheduled a meeting. And a few days later, we met at the Barnes & Noble in Springfield, Missouri. It's located on Gladstone and Battlefield. And I remember driving up. We had a red Volkswagen Jetta. Do you remember those boxy Jettas? That was a cool little car. It had a sunroof, tinted. I don't know why we sold it, but it was a cool little car. And I drove up and parked, and I remember walking in, kind of nervous, like, what am I doing here? And I don't remember, like, he spotted me or I spotted him, but we found a table, number 6. They usually have the Starbucks or whatever they're in. And what I remember, I don't know if it actually went this way, but I remember is, like, as soon as we sat down at the table, like, almost as soon as that happened, like, he got up again, and he went back to the religious section of the bookstore, and he grabbed this book off the shelf. This book is called The Heart of Christianity, Rediscovering a Life of Faith by an author, Marcus Borg. So obviously I went home and read the book, and for me it was a life-changing experience, both meeting that pastor and reading this book. And it's obviously something that stuck with me throughout the years. But I think the more I think about it, the more again, many years distance from that first meeting, like I think about how much that pastor took away from his time out of his busy schedules to meet with some disillusioned 20-something he didn't know from Adam to help me out. Now, fortunately, I'm actually fortunate enough to still know that pastor, and I'll hopefully get to see him again in a couple weeks in July at a national conference I'm going to. But as I think about it, I think in many ways, if I hadn't met that pastor, I sometimes wonder if I certainly don't think I'd be a pastor. I don't think I'd honestly be a Christian. And I don't think I'd be the person I am today, and I kind of like who I am today, if I can say that. So I'm thankful for that experience. And I think we can all think back, if we think back long enough and far enough in our life, I think we can all think about people in our lives who had a profound impact upon us. Someone who, because of their kindness, their influence, whatever, helped shape us to be the people we are today. Maybe it was like a school teacher who saw our academic prowess and kind of guide us into a field of expertise or a field of study. Maybe it was like a mentor or a supervisor at work who was willing to help us advance in our career. Maybe it was like an author like this, or maybe it was a speaker who just said something that just hit deep within us, and it kind of inspired us to go and take a risk, take a step in our personal life. I think about personally, like I can think about all these different mentors and pastors in my life who have made a difference to get me where I'm at today. I think back, like that's my goal, is to be that kind of impact on someone else's life, I hope, in the future. But I bet whoever they are, whatever they did, we can all think about someone who left an indelible mark upon us and remember what they did for us. And we know the incredible impact that people like these can have on our lives. And these are the kind of people I think that we see over and over again in the Bible. So today we're continuing our series on Elijah, one of these characters, I think, who leaves an indelible impact, at least upon me when I read him. And we're thinking about how Elijah went through many dry and barren times in his life, and how we can relate to that in our life of faith today. Now, for those who weren't here last week, I'll give a little backstory. Elijah was a prophet who was sent by God to speak out against the king's false worship of the false god Baal. And Elijah's name actually means, we have it here, his name means, my God is Yahweh. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic of Elijah going in to see this king. His name is King Ahab, and whenever he's announced to the king, you can imagine, the king basically hears, oh, my God is Yahweh, my God is Yahweh, introduced to the king. So the king Ahab and this Elijah character didn't get along real well, and you can kind of see why, because Elijah is just present, just his name being announced, but just this constant irritant to the king's face. So kind of how the story gets going is there's this drought in the land that's announced by Elijah to King Ahab, because King Ahab's god Baal was supposedly the god of fertility and the god of rain. So by Yahweh saying there's going to be a drought in the land, I mean, that's this direct smackdown of who's the real deal, right? So the drought comes, and we talked about this last week, Elijah is sent to go see a widow and her son who were not great shape themselves. When Elijah meets her, she was gathering kindling to make one last meal to feed her and her son before they starved to death. So, tough situation to be in. Now, fortunately, during Elijah's stay with her, they had enough to eat, miraculously, we might say. And right when things were about looking up, right when the widow might think, oh, my life is finally taking a turn for the better, things all of a sudden turn for the worse. So we're going to read here in 1 Kings 17. We'll have it on the screen if you'd like to follow along. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I still like to read it from the Bible here, from the text itself, just to interact. So we're going to read from 1 Kings 17, 1 Kings 17, actually, interesting enough. So after the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, jumps right into it, became ill. The son's illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. She then said to Elijah, the widow said, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son?" But Elijah said to her, "Give me your son." And Elijah took him up from her bosom and carried him up into the upper chamber where he was lodging, and laid him on his own bed. He cried out to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I am staying by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life come into him again." It's kind of almost like, thinking about it, it's kind of like Elijah did what we might call mouth-to-mouth resuscitation back in the day. So the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came to him again, and he revived. Elijah took the child, brought him down from the upper chamber into the house, and gave him to his mother. Then Elijah said, "See, your son is alive." So the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know," I think this is interesting, "now I know that you are Elijah, you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth. The word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Very interesting, I think, those words. Sorry, have a little problem. So, again, what would have been for this woman a slow and steady recovery had suddenly become something terrible and tragic. And she was already a widow in this culture where her standing, her social and economic fortunes were based on her ties to a man, her relationship to a man. And as we notice here, she doesn't even get a name. We just have to call her the widow. I thought almost we should all think of a name for this woman in our head, just to give her her due, right? But she's already a widow, and her economic and social status was tied to her former husband. But she looks at her son as her future hope, because if her son can grow up, she can at least, when he is grown up, she can at least have status and security and economic well-being in his household. So when this sudden illness comes upon the son, I mean, she's understandably upset, which we can understand. But I think what's interesting, though, is almost how sudden her ferociousness, her maternal instinct kicks in. Because, again, we talked about this last week. It's not too long ago in this backstory that she was prepared to die with her son. Verse 12 in first chapter 17, when Elijah comes to her, she said, "I have nothing baked. We're going to home to prepare some food that we may eat it and die." So she's ready to die, and then all of a sudden, jumping ahead to verse 18, she says to Elijah, she says, "Why have you done this to me, O man of God? You have come to bring my sin to repentance and cause the death of my son." So it's the sudden transfer of being ready to die, being willing to die, and all of a sudden now, after spending some time with Elijah, after experiencing the possibility of life with Elijah, all of a sudden this woman is ready to live and wants life for her son. So I wonder what's behind that impassioned plea in verse 18 where she says to Elijah, "No, what is happening right now, Elijah, is not cool. This is not okay. You need to do something about it." What's behind that impassioned plea? What happened to her, I wonder, during her time with Elijah? somehow, after she was preparing herself for death, she was now fighting for her and her son's life. Now, on the surface, we could just say, oh, Elijah was a good guy. He was a good prophet, and he gave this widow strength and hope to live, I guess. But really, when I think about it, I think there's more to it than that. It's not that Elijah was a swell guy. Rather, I think it's through Elijah she encountered God. Let's look at verse 24. Chapter 17, verse 24. So the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth." Those words in your mouth are truth. The more I think about this story, last night when I was trying to go to sleep, the more I think about this story, though, the more I think about, last night when I was trying to sleep and I'm rehearsing this message in my mind, thinking about how I share this widow's story honorably. Like, the more I think about the story, the more I think, this widow, she's the hero of the story. It's not Elijah. I think on the surface we look and say, well, look what Elijah did. Look how much grace and truth he brought to this household. The more I think about it, this widow, she is the hero of this story. So I think about why does she say to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God"? It's almost like she had for herself experienced God, a God of life and of love and of passion, and she knew that she encountered God. She knew this to be true about God. She said, "Elijah, if your God is a God of love and truth and of passion and of life, then you need to take care of my son, because this is who God is." And this God of life and of love and of passion, made known to her through Elijah, gave her the strength to take care of her son and to fight for her son. I think back about Phil Snyder, that pastor's influence in my life. As we think back about all the people who have influenced in our lives, I bet we can all agree that it wasn't really just them. Rather, it was God acting through them. We encountered God through those people. And I think when we encounter God unexpectedly, especially, it changes us in ways unimaginably. Tom mentioned this is the last week of Pride, the month of Pride. As I think about that, I can't think about all the ways that time and time again, LGBTQ plus youth have encountered God or sought to encounter God through others and instead experienced shame, judgment, and rejection. I think in many ways their experiences echo the cry of the widow in saying, "What have you against me, man of God?" Something else I was thinking about last night as I was trying to sleep, I think it's a question many young immigrant children are asking as they come to our country and are not treated very well. I think they can ask and wonder about us as Americans, as people who are espoused to be a Christian nation. What have you against me, people of God? I was reading this past week in the Huffington Post that religious LGBT youth were 38% more likely to have recent suicidal thoughts, with an astounding 52% of lesbian youth having suicidal thoughts themselves. To me, those numbers are astounding and disheartening. Perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised given what we know about people's experiences, perhaps your own experiences in church. LGBTQ plus youth like these need an encounter with a woman or man of God like the widow experienced with Elijah. Through Elijah, she experienced a gracious, loving, and healing God, the same God these LGBTQ youth are seeking and needing. but let's be honest, not often finding. But the good news is, this is where you come in. Just like Elijah, you can be an avenue of God for people to encounter God through you. Whether it be an LGBTQ, I can't say it, too many words, LGBT youth trying to reconcile who they are with who they know about God, whether it be a friend or a family member going through a challenging time in their life, or whether it just be a stranger you encounter at the store, you have the power, if I could say it, you have the power to change someone's perspective, to change someone's understanding, to change someone's relationship with God. And if you yourself are in that dry and barren time in your life, find someone through whom you encounter God. So I think that's where we're changed. And it's not that you and yourself, we and ourselves are such awesome people, and you might say, speak for yourself, Loren, right? But rather it's because of God's Spirit within us that empowers us to do good. That's the story, that's the big story of Pentecost. This season of Pentecost we celebrate in the church world. We celebrate it because it's a yearly reminder of God's presence in the Spirit within us, with us, empowering us. And just like on that day of Pentecost, when 3,000 people joined the church after experiencing God through the disciples, when people encountered God through us, they'll want to encounter God with us. It's kind of like we might say word-of-the-mouth advertising. So the other day I was having coffee with a pastor. He's like, "Oh, Loren, it looks like you've been working out." So then we started talking about like our gym we go to. Maybe for some of you, I don't have this luxury. Maybe for some of you, someone checks out your hair and is like, "Man, I love your haircut." I don't have that working for me. So I have to help out in other ways. That's why I spend so much time at the gym. But some of you, you're walking around and then someone's like, "Man, I love your haircut." And you get talking about like who your stylist is. Maybe for some of you, it's like, it's a great recipe. And you share your recipe, where you got that recipe from. So in that same way, doesn't it make sense that when people encounter God through us, they'll want to know where we ourselves encounter God? Now, sure, this isn't to say that our church has all the answers, or that this is the only place to experience God. But we want people to know that this is a place where they can encounter God, perhaps in ways unexpected. So back in November, when we were just getting started, our second Sunday, in fact, I think it was, this family came, and they came, and I talked to the wife after, and she said they really enjoyed their time there, but her husband wasn't sure. I guess he wasn't cool with the affirming stance of us, of our church, and we're unlikely to return. But she told me something that has stuck with me, and I think is the best compliment I think we can get, and speaks to the truth about who we are and what we're trying to do here. She said, when she attended, she said, I could tell that God was with you. God was present. God's Spirit was with you, among you. And I think that is a powerful testimony. Because that's who we are and what we're trying to be. We want to be a place that no matter who you are, where you come from, or what you're about, we want this to be a place where people can experience God's grace, God's love, and God's welcome. So let's be a place. Let's be people through whom others can experience God. And by being so, we will be a place where everyone encounters God together. Let's pray.